Hello everyone, Darren here, and welcome to my review for Anno 1800's Tourist Season DLC. Tourist Season focuses on the arrival of permanent holiday makers to your island. You're going to establish bus routes and hotels to allow them to travel across your city to your most attractive hotspots. New attractions have also been added in the form of restaurants, cafes, and bars, where you'll choose different recipes to provide them with more exotic cuisine, while also giving some benefits to the locals. There's also an array of new fertilities in both the old and new world, primarily for making new products in the chemical plant. All of this is then capped off by the new monument, the Iron Tower, which provides more powerful buffs the more tourists you have. Now, before we go in depth with the Tourist Season DLC and how it plays, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Skillshare offers classes ranging from creative writing, graphic design, video editing, and even game development. I've used it personally when I wanted to learn more advanced techniques for video editing. I took the class Animating with Ease in After Effects by Jake Bartlett, which was excellent because the class also provided art assets and project files, which were huge time savers. Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning that there's no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, workshops, and live classes. Skillshare Premium is less than $10 per month with an annual subscription, and the first 1,000 of my viewers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Thank you to Skillshare. So, Tourist Season is the second DLC in Anno 1800's Season 3 pass, but can also be purchased separately. Though as of recording, I wasn't actually able to check the price of it individually as the store page just wasn't live yet. Tourist Season is compatible with existing campaigns and becomes available when you reach 500 engineers. At that point, you're going to have the ability to upgrade your public mooring into a tourist mooring, which doesn't actually change the functionality of the building, it just allows tourists to actually visit your island. On the new Tourist tab, you'll then get the ability to build bus stops and hotels, and I have to say, I'm really impressed with how this is designed. These buildings operate like nothing else in Anno 1800, which gives the DLC a really fresh feel to it. So for starters, we have the bus stop. A bus stop has a radius around it, which is where tourists can walk to. The tourists have 12 different buildings that they want to be able to reach by bus: a public mooring, a variety theatre, a restaurant, zoo, docklands, museum, botanical garden, cafe, palace, World's Fair, bar, and the Iron Tower. Of course, docklands, botanical garden, and the palace are all DLC, so if you don't have them already, they won't actually be a factor, but if you do, they basically just provide you a little bit of extra money for including them. Now, obviously, you can't really fit all of these buildings around one bus stop, so you need to link bus stops together, and this is where things get interesting. A bus stop also has a range of just over 50 tiles in all directions, and you can see this from the green line. When two bus stops connect, their fulfillment of those buildings extend through each other. However, certain buildings have a higher fall-off threshold to that extension than others. So, for something like a World's Fair, a building that you can only have once per island, as long as it's covered by a bus stop, all bus stops on that island will have the World's Fair fulfilled 100%. This is because practically tourists are willing to travel across the entire island to get to it, because it's quite a unique building. The same will go for the palace and docklands, but for something like a variety theatre, you're going to need to place these much closer to the bus stops because its fulfillment falls off rather quickly. This is probably the most interesting when it comes to something like the zoo or the museum. The higher the attraction value in these buildings, the further the reach through the bus stops will be. Again, this is a great way to represent the fact that tourists will be willing to travel further if your zoo is going to be bigger and more exotic. The main drawback here, though, is that there isn't really any good UI to show you how far things reach. You sort of just have to feel it out with a bit of trial and error and just check what percentage you're on. I think it would have been nice if maybe as you hovered over these different categories, you could have seen the fall-off range with maybe a blue line on the map similar to Blueprint mode. Ultimately, filling the needs of a bus stop doesn't actually do anything by itself. It's only when there's a hotel within its radius do the needs of the bus stop then transfer to the hotel and the tourists living there. So when you've got your first hotel up and running and it's within the radius of a bus stop, you can then see the basic needs and the luxury needs for tourists. Basic needs, just like regular residents, help the tourists grow and fill up the hotel and also provide some money. The basic needs are a combination of attraction spots and products, with several new ones like jam and shampoo. The luxury needs provide happiness and a lot of money, and they're also a mix of attraction spots and products. But what's most interesting here is that unlike the regular population not providing the tourists with their luxury needs, being fur coats, jewelry, lemonade, and souvenirs, causes a big debuff to their actual needs, their basic needs, capping them. This means that you cannot grow a full hotel if you don't provide enough luxury goods as well. Again, this is quite an interesting spin on the normal dynamic of basic needs to luxury needs. It no longer matters if you supply everything for basic needs. It quite literally will cap itself if the tourists aren't happy. This makes the system a tiny little bit more messy to read, but I think it's a really good addition because it's something new to think about and makes tourists feel quite distinct compared to the other residents. Not only that, but happiness usually ties to productivity, but tourists aren't a workforce. Instead, they're considered customers, and for buildings like the restaurant, cafe, and bar, you don't need a workforce, but you need a certain amount of customers, which I think again is quite a clever little spin on things. So, let's talk about some of the new production chains and the new fertilities. Tourist Season's production buildings are all listed as a new building type called the Multifactory, the idea being that you get a base building and you choose what it makes. The two variations of this are the orchard and the chemical plant. The orchard, rather oddly, has actually only got one selection in the old world, which is jam, but in the new world, the orchard can produce one of 4 different goods: coconut oil, cinnamon, citrus, and camphor wax. These can be grown on any island, and no other fertility or requirement is needed, you just need the basic workforce. Regardless of what it makes the product at the same rate every 30 seconds. The chemical plant has 3 recipes: shampoo, lemonade, and souvenirs. Again, the production rate is always the same, but the input and the output can be different. Personally, I'm not really a big fan of the Multifactory in its current implementation. The idea of a building that can change what it makes is cool, but the reality is that you're just going to set it to what you need and then likely never change it. If you do want to change it, it's quite micro-intensive to have to revisit a building and change its recipe and then weigh up what it needs and what it produces. So I sort of see this as it either just being a normal building like any other, or something that creates a bit of micromanagement. Ideally, I think it would have been much better if you could have set the ratios of what it makes. You could say, for instance, I want to set it to make 1 shampoo, 1 lemonade, and 1 souvenir, and then it would just continuously cycle through them. Or perhaps you could set it to make 6 shampoo, 3 lemonade, and 1 souvenir, and then it would cycle through them at that rate. To me, that would actually make for a very interesting building that's able to dynamically produce things at different rates. But in its current implementation, it just feels like any other building. So what are all these new goods used for? Well, they're typically used in the restaurants, the cafes, and the bars. These are all 4x6 buildings that are pretty much a copy and paste of each other. I was quite disappointed in general to see that they're all the exact same, except for some minor changes, and that hotels themselves don't actually come with any other variations either. There's just one look. The new building budget seemed to be a little bit low for this DLC, and part of me thinks that might be why the same building, a chemical factory or an orchard, makes different things, because perhaps they didn't have the budget to make the different buildings. Either way, I think that even though I am impressed with the gameplay of the DLC, this was still a bit of a disappointment. I'm not sure I know of any building in the game that is just a reskin of another one, except for maybe the oil plant and the gas plant, which I think is fair enough. So each of these buildings, the restaurant, the cafe, and the bar, essentially do the same thing. They provide 3 recipes where you get to choose what dish, dessert, or drink gets created. There is an additional recipe in each building if you own the Passage DLC, and another if you own the Land of Lions DLC, which is a nice way to provide some extra content if you own previous DLC. Now, unlike a regular product, the dishes that get created don't actually go into your storage. Instead, they actually act as a buff that is applied to the houses around the restaurant. So every 60 seconds, 3 goods are consumed, and the buff will remain active. You get to select the buff, though, by choosing the recipe for the dish, and that'll apply to everyone in the building's radius. So for instance, in a restaurant, the dish Lobster Cheminée provides a happiness benefit to the residents. It reduces their consumption of beer and chocolate by 5% and rum by 20%. Another example, the cafe, a recipe for the donut foire, gives a negative 10% to coffee, negative 5% to chocolate, and a negative 25% to schnapps consumption. The effects don't stack, they're only applied once, but you can have a cluster of restaurants making different dishes and all of those effects will combine. This is quite a fun building, or a set of 3 buildings, but again, in a similar fashion to the chemical plant or the orchard, you sort of just set it and then forget it. But considering it is a restaurant, cafe, or bar, it's definitely more suited to the theme of changing recipes more often, and also, certain recipes are actually locked behind quests from the tourists and for doing certain things. So there's actually a little bit of progression to unlocking the different recipes and experimenting with what works for you. Tourists themselves don't actually care what's being served in these 3 different buildings, just so long as the building is actively producing a dish, they consider their need for it fulfilled, as long as it's close by. Lastly, the DLC also features a new monument, the Iron Tower. The Iron Tower is a relatively cheap monument to build, certainly smaller than the World's Fair and needs less materials and less of a workforce. Some stuff I'm leaving out of my review to avoid any spoilers are the quests that surround the tower and the recipes in general. I really enjoyed them. I think they added great flavor, no pun intended, to the DLC, to have Emma the tourist talking about her favorite dishes, and the Queen discussing her plans for the monument and the hotel she was going to stay in during her royal visit. There's some dialogue options and some small variations to the results, which are, a treat to see.
As fine a cafe menu as I've ever tasted.
Our own, that all may know, look upon our works and praise the Empire. At last, the moment of truth approaches. Our stratospheric savior of burnished iron awaits. To the inauguration.
Once the Iron Tower is built, it basically acts as a giant restaurant, with instead of 3 ingredients, it takes 4, but it also increases the maximum residents that you can have by 10% of whatever building it covers, except for scholars. What's interesting is that you can actually set a slider to allow for more and more customers to use the building, increasing the radius of its buffs across a huge section of your island. So it really is quite the powerful building for buffing up your population numbers. In total, you can use 5,000 tourists to attain the maximum radius, which means 10 maxed out hotels. To grow a full hotel, you need 4,000 tourists. Now, in case you're wondering, tourist season doesn't add any new items to affect hotels, orchards, chemical plants, or tourists directly. And the only item I found was from the Queen that actually increases attractiveness if you get your dialogue options correct. And that's it for my review of Anno 1800 Tourist Season. While I do have some negatives about the reskinned buildings and some reservations about multifactories, generally, I think the DLC is still really quite good, just in the way that it makes you think different about how to grow this new class of population and how you're ultimately now trying to connect every major amenity building on your island through a network of buses and then feed them into hotels. I genuinely think that's quite clever and original. It's unlike anything else in Anno 1800, at least. If you want to check out my other DLC reviews, I've reviewed every piece of content so far for Anno 1800, so check the description and playlist to see how this DLC stacks up against the rest. Also, I have an ongoing Let's Play right now, and from episode 39 onwards, we're going to be diving into tourism. Feel free to just jump in, as I always give a quick summary of what's going on so people don't feel too lost. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, thank you very much for watching, and remember, if you want to support this series directly, you can click the join button to become a channel member. Doing so will get your name in the credits, as well as loyalty badges and emotes to use in the comments. If you don't see the join button, it means the video is being copyright claimed, but you can still join from the channel page on desktop. You can also link your account to our Discord to get a special role on there that will give you access to the Senate House and a few other perks.
A competitor